Okay, hello, and welcome back to I'm All Ears podcast, episode 2. I'm so glad that you're joining us again. Today's episode, we have a super important guest, Samuel Scarborough, and we're going to be talking a little bit about some of the things that he's involved with, which I'll let him share in just a second, and just how he balances being engaged with the important things he's involved with and also balancing a regular life, especially in a political climate like this, a social climate like this. So Samuel, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and sort of the things you're involved with?
Yes, absolutely. I'm Samuel, also go by Sam. Grew up in Durham. Shout out to Black Wall Street. Shout out to the Hayti community. I'm a second year history major here, AAAD studies minor. So that's African American, and diaspora studies. And I'm involved with a myriad of organizations on campus, ranging from a little bit of involvement with Students for Justice in Palestine, also the Community Justice Abolition Collective, and then organizations I'm more involved with, like the Carolina NAACP and also the Affirmative Action Coalition. And then off campus, I'm involved with Durham Beyond Policing, the North Carolina Poor People's Campaign, and a whole lot of other things that we can get into.
Yeah, a lot of involvement. So that is I feel like it almost speaks for itself why I invited you here. I wanted to start sort of by introducing the theme of the podcast, and that have you seen the TikTok of, I don't know the influencer's name, but she has a video where she's like the friend that's too woke. And what she does is she stages a conversation, just like basic TikTok, like pretending you're talking to a lot of people.
Mhm.
And her friend will say something like, "Oh yeah, I was out at Applebee's the other day," and the friend that's too woke would interject and be like, "Oh, well, you know that Applebee's actually was built on the backs of like enslaved people, and they actually," and just going on and on. And
Yeah,
so I know I had reached out to you and I was like, I want to do this idea that's like beating the friend that's too woke stereotype. And so I
dope.
thought of you because we know each other from high school as well.
Mhm.
And so like I know you as a person as well, but separate from your engagement. So I wanted to
Yep.
talk to you about how you, like, let's start by sort of talking vaguely about how you have gotten involved with the things you're involved with, and then how
Mhm.
you balance that with being just a normal student and a normal person and friend and stuff like that.
Absolutely. That's a great question. So, in terms of my advocacy, it all started back my first year in high school. So, this was right before the pandemic hit. I was very interested in questions of environmental injustice, land loss for Black Americans. And I saw all these issues converging in Durham with stormwater pollution. And so, I did a little bit of research. I was kind of involved with this thing. It was called like the youth, it's something equity based with the school system. And one of the organizers of that event put me in contact with my dear colleague, Isa Deering. They're now in Oxford doing their PhD program.
Oh
And
wow.
so I jumped towards the Durham Youth Climate Justice Initiative. And ever since then, I've just been in different organizing spaces, whether it's on economic justice, environmental justice, like anti-policing work, like whatever, all of these issues pretty much converge anyway. So I've just kind of been able to bounce around different spaces, jump in, provide my, creative and all my other energies into different campaigns that different groups are launching. But in terms of like how I balance that with my just regular everyday life, that was something that I've kind of just learned from applying how I would do it with my honors and AP classes. Like in many ways, throughout high school and in some parts of my college career thus far, school has almost felt secondary to advocacy work. And a lot of my professors have been very understanding and have worked with me. So, in terms of like the three spheres of life, like my social life, my school life, and my advocacy life, the school life, it feels secondary. And also, in many ways, the people that are involved in that space have made it a lot easier for my work and advocacy. And then also, I've really made sure to stress to myself to add like important like deadlines throughout the day. So, like today, anything past 8 p.m. is just me chilling. It's just me talking with friends, dissociating, whatever it is, like is not going to be advocacy based. There are some days where I don't necessarily have the deadline just because I know some things are very pressing. You can't put a timeline on crisis. And so if it's something like, a campaign around some legislation that was introduced in the state house, which they normally do like a day before they vote, then I'll give a little bit of leeway. But for things that, aren't as urgent, I mainly just make sure to set those deadlines for myself. And like I said, I'm a very private person. Even though you might see me all out and about talking to a lot of people, a lot of like my closest friends, family, that's who I usually surround myself with, especially in my most intimate moments. And so um, I feel like I've been able to do a good job of balancing both, or I guess the three different worlds. And in many ways, they kind of converge into each other. Um, in usually healthy ways. It's usually not something where it's like very overbearing or stressful. Usually I'll find a lot of intersections with my advocacy work in my school life as well. So one of the things I tell people all the time is I don't do assignments to check a box or to get a grade. I usually do those assignments to better inform my advocacy work. So it ends up becoming productive as well. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you. That's important. So you say usually. Has there been moments that you've run into pretty significant troubles of balancing?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I definitely have had my hurdles, especially during high school, because there were some days, I don't know if it was my senior year, but definitely like the latter half of my junior year, where it was like all day. Like I'm going to classes. I have my, what do we have, like 8:30s or whatever.
Yeah.
At science and math, I have my 8:30, then classes, lunch where I get a little bit of a break. Then afterwards, I have another class, and then I'll have like meetings all the way out to like 6, 7 p.m. And then I have all the homework and stuff I have to do afterwards. Um, COVID was particularly hard, even though, we're technically still in the realm of dealing with COVID. When the pandemic was at its height, that was also a challenging moment as well. I remember like having to take a step back myself because I was on Zoom on the computer from 9 to 9. Like that's not sustainable at all. I made sure to talk to my parents, and they've been very helpful throughout the entire process, very supportive. And so I was able to, again, establish some healthy boundaries, and doing that from an early age has really helped me. So even when I had very, I wouldn't even call them stressful for real, but very busy times throughout my college experience so far, especially like last spring where we had the attacks on DEI, we had the encampment, we had all these different things happening at once. I felt like I had better clarity in that moment on how to move in the different campaigns and how to make sure to get my schoolwork done in the process.
Yeah, that's impressive. So obviously, and I think I mentioned this to you before we had even started the podcast, but obviously in your case, it's slightly, in the context of what we're talking about today, it's slightly more extreme because you are pretty established in that activist and like social justice world. So for people who are like, we're living in a climate where it's impossible to ignore what's going on politically, what's going on socially.
Yeah.
So for people who are not to the extent of being super involved, but want to figure out how to maintain being socially aware and being caught up with current events, but still balancing their normal routine. Like, what do you advise for people who are not to the point of being extremely engaged, but still want to be within the realm? Because we have to be.
Absolutely. Look, I think the first thing I would tell anyone is to find your organization. The worst thing you can do at this moment is to kind of gravitate towards atomization, towards being isolated from everyone. Because all it takes is to just, this happened to me the other morning, to go on your Instagram and boom, like just doom scroll. And so it's important to make sure that you have a supportive network around you. So you understand, one, that you're not in this alone. There's this adage at many of the protests where we say we keep us safe. And I feel like that is a foundational component of not only thoughtfully and effectively engaging politically in this moment, but also doing it in a healthy way. So making sure you have a supportive network of people around you. So find your organization. That's the first thing I would tell anyone. And make sure that organization's values and practices align with what you believe. So many times, organizations I've found, they have good values on paper, but the people that are actually like practicing those values is a little bit of a disconnect. I've been a part of a couple organizations. I won't put them on blast.
Yeah, we won't name drop.
I won't put them on blast, but I've definitely seen things where it says something like this and that on their values. But then you look at the people in leadership positions, the people that you're interacting with on a day-to-day basis, and those values are not embedded in how they treat other people. So making sure when you're finding that organization, making sure that one, those values and those practices align, and two, make sure both of those things align with what you believe and practice on a day-to-day basis too. And usually the rest takes care of itself. Excuse me. Many of the people that I work with on a day-to-day basis, from an advocacy standpoint, they might work for one or two organizations at most, but they're very happy. They're leading healthy lives. It's not really impairing their relationships with friends, partners, family, etc. So I think for most people, that's a good starting point to find your organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And then my next question, talking about even getting involved with organizations, this will be sort of a two-part question, but
Hmm.
have you experienced any sorts of anxieties or fears with getting involved, especially with some of the, I'll say, quote air quotes here, but bigger organizations like SJP and other
Hmm.
ones like that, where like as much as we hate to say it, like there is a threat there.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering what sort of anxieties and maybe fears you've felt dealing with that and how
Hmm.
you personally have overcome that, and then what you would say to people who do have anxieties about getting involved and who maybe are passionate about certain things but are scared for their own well-being.
Yes, no, absolutely. I think, and this is one thing we were actually talking about in my sociology class, but I think for some people, and I think this is the case with me, sometimes the cost of not being involved outweighs the potential cost of whatever dangers are associated. So that's kind
Mhm.
of the way I deal with the anxiety piece. But I know for other people, that is a very critical like turning point over whether or not they get involved in the organization. And so I think when you're talking about bigger orgs like SJP, that are more prominent, and are usually the face of more repression, either from police or other like anti-protesters and stuff like that, it's important to start from the ground up. So if you're just now getting involved, I would not join those organizations. I would make sure you do one, join an organization that's a little bit more low commitment, but two, also do a little bit of political education as well, just so you're more educated in the spaces that you might wish to be involved with down the line. Um, because and this isn't putting anyone blast, but this is more so just a realization that I've made, is that sometimes in watching people who have made that transition a little too quickly, they end up making mistakes in these bigger organizations that jeopardize the safety of other folks in those spaces, especially
Interesting.
people that are marginalized. And so I think that's very important to, when you're finding your organization, if you're not that involved, you're trying to be more knowledgeable, you should not go to those bigger ones that are more front facing first. And I've personally faced the threat of doxing before. I've had someone try to um essentially like assassinate my character over Twitter. I've had experiences where I've had adverse um interactions with law enforcement and stuff like that. So I've kind of just come to understand that that's a part of what I do. But for people um who might not want to experience those things firsthand, at such a heightened rate, I would start with some of the smaller organizations.
Yeah, and I think it's super important with that to understand that like being involved can mean a lot of things. Like there are
Hmm.
so much things that people may not even think about that are in a way putting yourself out there and advocating for certain things. Like I even think about organizations that may not jump to your mind as being part of advocacy, but getting involved with like the residence hall
Hmm.
associations. And there's so many smaller things like within your campus or within your social sphere that are
Hmm.
still doing something.
Yeah.
And there's like so many different organizations. Like organizations exist and get approved because they're looking to change something,
Hmm.
whether that's politically, socially, like even just providing more entertainment or something like that. And I
Yeah.
think that it's super important to not dismiss those things, especially to build your own comfortability in then taking those steps to, like you said, going for things that are slightly more serious in that sense or like larger in scope. And I think that that's a super important thing to remember, especially as we're transitioning like in this college world, like
Ooh.
transitioning into
Yeah.
the real world. Like you're gonna need to know what works for you and what you're interested in and what you're passionate about and how to get involved and how to connect those. Like you said, back to like our first part of this was talking about like how a lot of your involvements are wrapped around in each other anyway, like your classes. And so I think that finding that balance is super important too.
No, absolutely. And further to that point as well, it's also acknowledging and finding the skills that you have that could be advantageous to whatever organization you work with. So, although most people, when they see whatever I do, most people probably just see like the public speaking aspect or me holding up a sign. But some of the actually most effective things I've done has actually been on towards like the research side, like doing historical archive research or doing what I would like to call like power mapping research to understand the people that control our education, like the core tenets of what makes the Transparency Project from the Affirmative Action Coalition so effective. A lot of that hasn't even been public speaking or getting in front of the camera. It's just talking to people that have, research experience, that have journalism experience, and figuring out how to curate that to whatever you're trying to fight for. So a lot of the things that I've been most effective at, even though I've been told I'm a very effective orator, public speaker, a lot of it I would think has been on the research side, on the writing side for whatever op-eds we've published. Those are things that I found more effective.
Yeah, and I mean, that is such a huge part of advocacy and engagement in general because, I mean, I even think that spending time with something that you're passionate about is going to prepare you to like get out there and do those things because
Hmm.
obviously you're not gonna, or I would hope you're not gonna put yourself out in front of a crowd of people without really sitting with the subject that you're going to
I
talk
agree.
about. Like there are so many, and like even, and this is something that I wanted to ask you about too, is
Hmm.
sort of how you deal with the fact that even with your own opinions and like the opinions that drive you to get involved, like there's always so many different perspectives. And what you
Hmm.
don't want to do is getting up in front of people proclaiming your opinion and not even addressing the other side. Even if you
Yep.
don't fully agree with it, like you
Hmm.
need to sit with it. And
No,
so like
absolutely.
I mean, could you speak more to that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think part of that too is how you curate your messaging. I think any core part of messaging, especially from I'm getting into the weeds here, from like a little, what some would call like a political praxis standpoint. So making sure you're taking the theoretical approaches towards a more practical or like on the grounds, like level, like applying what you're thinking about, what you're researching into the real world. It's important to really grapple with the arguments or ideas coming from the other side of whatever issue you're talking about because it better informs how you message on something. And it's also important to really get a pulse on what your audience is and really hone in the messaging that effectively communicates to the audience. Because, for instance, and this was something we did in reflection on our most recent teaching with transparency. And that's, making sure that, we don't do things that are specifically catered to, for instance, someone that is probably on the like far left towards where I would probably be in
Mhm.
terms of my political ideology, like what I believe in. To not curate all my messages for people that are all the way out there, because if you do that, your message is not going to get across. Your message is not going to get a lot of sway for the majority of Americans, and so it's important to really understand the audience you're addressing. Um, and then again, with that piece of acknowledging the other side, you don't even have to like, because at some points there are some things that come out of Trump's camp that are, to be quite frank, just wrong, just factually incorrect. But you don't even have to come out and just say like that's factually incorrect, blah blah blah. You can just demonstrate the facts on your side and allow people to come to that conclusion themselves. And again, in terms of the work that I've done, the research stuff and all that for transparency has proven to be very effective because there are a lot of people who, they're not the most progressive, but when I illustrate these ideas to them, like when I break down who exactly controls their education, when I do that power mapping exercise for people, it really does get their wheels turning. Because no matter if you're on the far right, on the far left, just the basic understanding that, for instance, in the state of North Carolina, for college students and students at the North Carolina School of Science and Math, there are nearly 250,000 of us, and we do not have a single vote on the body that controls how our education policy is set up. And then for our individual institutions, like the Board of Trustees here, we only have one seat out of what, over a dozen,
Mhm.
and that holds like no power. Like no matter what you believe in politically, I think most people can get behind the idea of, hey, students who are paying tuition to these institutions, who are giving these institutions the high rankings because of the research that they're contributing, because of their grade point averages, all these things. We should have a stake in how our education is governed. We should have a stake in a actual meaningful way to exercise decision-making power over what our education looks like. Like, I think that's a very basic idea, fundamental to ideas of democracy that many Americans hold true, that anyone can get behind. Now, what are the politics of that engagement? What students in power do you want? That's a different question for a different day. But baseline ideas like that, from a messaging standpoint, have proven to be very effective. And so, kind of wrap all of that up to say that in weighing different opinions, that component is critical to any organizer, because the most important thing is not being right, it's being right and effective. Because you can be right and you can have the morally just position, you could sit on the moral high ground all you want, but if you don't influence the way other people think, if you don't put your ideas into policy that actually bring change to the world, you're just kind of participating in your own echo chamber, and that's not effective. That's not changing lives.
Yeah, and I think that is super relevant even to just the sort of ironic theme of the podcast of like being the friend that is too woke, because it gets to a point, and I was thinking about this heavily during the election season, especially being on UNC's campus. Like, I am from a town that is super conservative, super red, super all of that. And obviously, like, if you know me, like, you know that's not where I align. But I completely agree with you that it to a certain point, like, you can't just say what you believe is right, because to some people that just sounds extreme, and that it doesn't, you're not giving any justifications. And so in order to bring yourself back down in a sense and beat those friend that's too woke stereotypes, like you need to know the conversation on both sides, and you need to engage with them both. Like, I think about back to what I was saying about being on this campus during an election season, is that to be honest, there was a moment in time where I was fully under the impression that Kamala was going to win, because that's all that was being fed to me. And it took me going home for a break to be like, wait, this is not at all like what's really going on.
That's not where the median American is.
Literally. No. And because like you guys are just saying what you agree with, but you're not really connecting it to the people around you. And it's ineffective. Like, like, obviously, I mean, we see based on the outcome of the presidency, but even like despite the outcome, like, it's the way that we present what we believe sometimes. Like, if you're not trying to find ways to connect with every single person, whether you agree with them or not, it's gonna be ineffective.
No, absolutely. And to that point, you know, this isn't to say every tactic that's been tried has been inaccessible, because I will say there have been some attempts to make things accessible, and you know, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't force it to drink it. But what I will say is sometimes as well, the messaging, it can be inaccessible at times for people. And it's a contrast. Again, it goes back to this idea of the disconnect between values and practice. So for instance, many of my people, like us on the far left, like we'll talk about Karl Marx all the time. He has this famous quote, from each according to his ability to each according to his need, which basically means like meeting people where they are. We'll say that till, you know, we can't speak anymore, till our tongue runs dry. But whenever we're actually like in the field, like doing something to talk to people, are we actually meeting people where they are? Like, are we actually meeting the median American, who I think has a median like reading level of like 8th grade? We know the history education we were taught in public schools. Like, most Americans that are coming out of public high schools, even the most prestigious ones, aren't learning much. So like, are we actually meeting these people where they are? Ideas of restorative justice are built on ideas of rehabilitation. So if we being quite real, like if someone doesn't say something completely right the first time, like they might not be the most politically correct, do we just throw our hands up and give up on this person? Or do we keep trying and keep figuring out ways, obviously, you know, not to harm other people, but to do it in ways where we can actually make it a moment of learning, of building? Or do we just throw them to the side? Like, so I just feel like sometimes there is a true disconnect for real with what we practice and what we say we believe in. And what I found to be most effective in being that friend that is too woke sometimes is quite literally just applying those principles. Because I mean, it makes my interactions with people who are less politically involved a lot easier, because it also makes it less stressful for me as well, because I understand where people are coming from. I think earlier on in high school, I was more of the opinion of like, man, I'm just not going to talk to these people. I don't want to be around them. But at the end of the day, it's like you come to the point where you realize this is the world you've been given. These are the organizing conditions you've been given. You're either going to wake up and organize, or you're just going to back down and let it happen.
Right. And I think that that's super important in defining or almost redefining what activism in itself is. Because, like you said, if you're not meeting people where they are, nothing is going to change.
Mm-mm.
Like, I think about organizations that, and again, I'm not going to put anyone on blast
Yeah.
here, but ones that, for example, are just like, this is how it has to be. Like, this is what you need to do, blah, blah, blah. How does that connect to me? Like,
Mhm.
maybe I can sort of see where you're coming from, but if you're not presenting it to me in a way that's like, I fully resonate this and I see how this is going to benefit me, I see how this
Yeah.
is going to benefit the people around me, like, and
Mhm.
also like coming from the perspective of people like, for example, and my mom's probably going to be listening to this episode, but my mom,
Mhm.
she was a school board member in my town, and she's a
Mhm.
registered Republican.
Mhm.
And like one of the things that she has taught me, and I know we've talked about this already, is that nothing is going to change if you can't meet people where they are.
Yep.
And sometimes it's impossible to. In the case of her, for example, like she wasn't reelected because it was like almost impossible for her to present her ideas in a way that met the other people where they were.
Yeah.
And sometimes that happens. And I
Mhm.
feel like that's where we get to the point where we're like, okay, I've tried. I have engaged in the way that is
That's
with
what I
me.
agree with. Yeah.
Yes, I've tried. And there is a point where like you're not going to connect with these people, and
Mhm.
that's fine. But if you're not going into it like, I can see why why you think this way, let me present it in this way.
Mhm.
If you're not even trying that, it's not gonna work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and one of my sorry to cut you off, but
No, you're good.
one of my organizing comrades, Toby, I hope I'm getting the quote correctly, but he was talking about this idea of being frustrated at systems and not the people.
Right.
Like, remember, it's the systems that we're fighting. So that's another thing that happens within the context of protests as well. Like, I'll have police that come up, like, harass, like, say my name to try to intimidate me or whatever. But at the end of the day, that's not our focus. And if you allow that to be your focus, whatever the police are saying, you're losing focus on what really we're trying to protest for here. Like, if we're protesting something, it's not usually something that is directly with the police, that the police have power over. It's something that the chancellor has power over, or the provost, or the board of trustees, or the board of governors. Remember, we always have to reshift our focus and remind ourselves that these are the people that we're actually trying to get a policy passed with, or that we're actively resisting. And so I think to that point as well, like, it's important for people to maybe redirect some of their frustrations not towards the individual person, but towards the systems that are in many ways influencing how this person is interacting with you. Like, that's where the frustration should be pushed off to. And it gives yourself a lot more peace at the end of the day as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that even just switching from trying to convince other people, but to just finding peace within yourself too,
Mhm.
I completely agree with you that understanding that some of these things are not an individual person, and even like that goes back to the understanding the perspective of other people. Like,
Yep.
think about why they're in that position
Mhm.
because of the things that they're understanding and they're consuming. Like, and like obviously the people who are in these really high positions, it's going to be extremely hard to change
Yeah.
their minds. But like to a point, like you have to understand where they're coming from as well.
Mhm.
And I know that we've said this a million times in a million different ways, but
Mhm.
it is so crucial to just take a second to look at what these people are basing their thoughts on
Yeah.
before you go ahead and be like, oh, this is just the most evil person in the world.
Mhm.
And I think that is super important. I think it's super challenging,
It is.
especially like for people who are experiencing these things and their negative repercussions on us.
Mhm.
Like, it is super challenging, but I
Yeah.
think that it is necessary, and I think you can find some sort of peace of mind in that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, we're at 30 minutes, so I'm good to, unless you have more to say or anything to add on, which please feel free.
I think the other thing too is to just emphasize, many people think organizing is, again, giving these big speeches, or even some of the tidbits I gave earlier, the research side. Organizing at its core, especially within the context of like for instance, like labor organizing and stuff like that, it's quite literally just building relationships with other people.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's also been a source of comfort for me as well. Like I was talking about earlier with finding your organization, not going through this isolated, it gives you a sense of support. Um, Building relationships with people beside you, like that's going to be very foundational into how we resist what I see as an existential threat for the next 4 years, potentially next, however long. Because I think today,
Oh my gosh.
that gentleman was talking about, him wanting to go for a third term. So it's important, to really hone in on the relationships to the people beside you, because at the end of the day, excuse my language, when shit hit the fan, like those are the people you got to lean on. Those are the people that are going to lean on you.
Right.
And so, I think all of that, I say all of that to say that organizing from a foundational level is really just about building relationships with other people. And, as a person of faith, I go back to that golden rule of treat others how you want to be treated.
Yeah.
Look at how Jesus Christ led his life. Jesus wasn't going around judging people. He wasn't going around saying, oh, you don't have all these fully developed political opinions yet, so I'm not going to engage with you,
Right.
or you don't make enough money. No. Jesus was the least judgmental person. Jesus was about meeting people where they were, and Jesus was, again, about helping to find people ways to better enrich their lives.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I think, as a person of faith as well, and faith guiding some of my activism, and as a person who believes that, it's important to not just look at the Bible as a static document, but as a document that can inform your lived experience. Applying those ideas of what it means to live in a day-to-day context that Jesus was showing us into my advocacy. Because again, how can I, bell hooks put this very easily, how can I love someone if I'm harming them at the same time? Like, how can I love someone if I'm not even putting the effort in to understand where they're coming from? So yeah, that's all I have to say.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's super important. Living, even like it's important that you acknowledge that faith is guiding like what you do too. But even for people who maybe do not align religiously in any way,
Mm-hmm.
that's just the golden rule in general. That's so
Yeah.
important. If anything from this podcast, take that. Like
Mm-hmm.
you need to treat others how you would expect to be treated.
Yep.
And similarly, like play into your strengths. You were given these strengths for a reason. Like play into those.
Yes.
Play into the strengths of other people and figure out how you can make change work for you and work for the
Absolutely.
people around you and that you care about.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I think we did it. I think we beat the
Yes.
stereotype. Honestly, we nailed that one. All right. Well, thank you so much for being on this episode today. I'm so glad that you were able to. This was a really enriching conversation.
Yes. Thank you for the invitation. As always, thank you.
Of course. And to my listeners, thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode of I'm All Ears. And I hope to see you next week. Thank you so much.